Welcome, everyone. My name is John Sonstley. I'm the director of the undergraduate program, and I'm filling in today with Peter Rupert, who is off giving a seminar someplace. This is the third annual Philip Babcock lecture. So Philip was a colleague of ours who died of cancer just 3 years ago, and he was a devoted undergraduate teacher, and we created this lecture series in his honor. The goal is to bring to UCSB distinguished economists who will talk to students about important issues of the day. The speaker is chosen each year by the members of the Junior Honors Seminar, who are now seniors and are here today. Today's Babcock lecture is Matt Kahn from UCLA. So Matt is an urban economist like me. I know a lot about his work before he became an environmental economist. And he brings together both of those traditions in a really interesting and appealing way. And today he's going to talk, as you can see, about cities adapting to climate change. So without further ado, Matt Kahn.
Folks, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great honor to be here. I'm going to try to be interesting. Does anyone mind if I be funny as well? And I've already forgotten my whoops, this talk is over. Folks, John, the ground rules, I think can I take questions and answer? Can I take questions? And so I'm going to try to say some provocative and interesting things. And as usual, I'm trying to run an experiment to see if this interests folks. As John kindly introduced me, I'm an environmental and urban economist, and I'm always an optimist, but my mother warns me against being overly of wishful thinking. But this will be up to you how you view this presentation. Folks, my starting point is that I don't know what climate change is going to do to our world, to Santa Barbara, to the United States, to the whole world. But I know that I don't know. Folks, and I argue that the dangerous person doesn't know that they don't know. Think about that. That was a joke. But my starting point is climate change is a set of known unknowns, potentially very serious. My second point is that all over the world, we're moving to cities. Whether it's in China, the median person around the world now lives in cities. What I want you folks to think about is for the place you grew up, for the place you might live your lives as adults, what will that geographic area be like because of climate change? How will its quality of life change? Folks, the last bullet point. We kind of always know that the 1% are always going to have it pretty good. But it's very important to think about the future quality of life for the urban poor and middle class in our hotter future. I want us to think hard about the opportunities and challenges they'll face because of climate change. And if we're able to anticipate the future, we have the ability, unlike the Titanic, to react to that challenge to create a better world for our grandchildren. Folks, first a piece of data. Here's data. Here it is again. No? Oh, yes. Folks, I stole this from the World Bank. Time goes from 1960 to about 2010. Do you see global carbon dioxide emissions just linearly rising? For the econometricians in the room, can you fit a linear trend here? Thank you. Do you see the curve being bent? So there's been a lot of talk about solar panels, Germans putting solar panels on everything. Folks, I just see a linear time trend just rising. Can we boo that collectively? Good, we're going to need some interactive group. Good. And folks, of course, I am a believer that climate change is a very serious challenge and that this rising trend exacerbates the challenge of climate change. It has been argued as we get ready for the Paris Convention that we need an 80% reduction in global greenhouse gas emissions to help cap the likely rise in future hotter temperatures. I'm very concerned we're not going to meet this target even over the next 30 or 40 years. The world's population is growing. I think that's a good thing. My one child is very happy, I think. Per capita income is rising around the world, which I think is a wonderful thing. I realize it has unintended consequences, but I'm a fan of economic growth. And from basic angle curves, as we grow richer, we drive more, we consume more electricity, likely to come from fossil fuels, we eat more meat. We continue to see free riding by every government. I am happy about the commitments that some nations have made going into the Paris conference in December, but talk is cheap. We will see if these governments, whether it's the United States government or the Chinese government or India's government, commit to their targets to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. Yes, the United States is slowly giving up coal, and that's wonderful on many levels, but I'm very concerned that we face a deep challenge in bending this curve and achieving a deep reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Folks, what I want to do in my talk today, and I hope this interests you, is I'm a microeconomist. Is there any love of microeconomics in this room? Tepid love. Okay, well, we'll come back to that. We're going to be microeconomists talking about the incentives of households, firms, and governments to step up their game as we anticipate challenges from climate change. Of course, under a business as usual scenario, we could suffer greatly, but how can we change our game? If you anticipate a crisis, can that create opportunities for anyone to help us to adapt? We're going to start in the United States, where over 80% of us live in cities, and we're going to end in the developing world. And of course, the developing world faces greater adaptation challenges to climate change. There's a large agricultural sector. The agricultural sector, of course, is highly sensitive to rainfall and heat. But there's also a huge rural to urban migration taking place. And I'd like to talk about some of the consequences of that trend. Folks, here is the United States, and here is a graph I took from Jeff Sachs and Jordan Rappaport. Can everyone find Santa Barbara on the picture? I have a shaky hand. Am I roughly there? Higher. We can go into Washington. Tough crowd. Folks, the point that Jeff Sachs and Jordan Rappaport want you to see is in the shaded area. Folks, I'm giving you all of an eye test. Does everyone see that the United States has a lot of land? But do you see that in the shaded area, which is only 13% of our land area, 51% of the population and 57% of our income is in coastal locations? Folks, if I can use a technical term from economics, are we screwed? We have chosen, due to amenity reasons, our coasts are some of our most productive cities. New York City, LA, San Fran, they're also our beautiful cities. We have chosen to put ourselves perhaps in harm's way. What fascinates me very much is, yes, in the year 2015, we are a coastal nation, but our capital stock doesn't live forever. Folks, would this building be here in the year 2070, 2080, 2090? Tough crowd. All durable capital is constantly depreciating. I'm a depreciating 49-year-old piece of capital. I'm going to drink tonight to further depreciate. We always face a question as investors: what assets do we invest in? If we anticipate there's going to be sea level rise in New Orleans, what is an orderly evacuation? How do we get the capital stock and the people out of there? If government invest in seawalls to protect the area, does that have the unintended consequence of encouraging people to live in a risky place? Folks, stop text messaging your brothers. We're going to touch on all of these in the next 25 minutes. Let's do it. So folks, I get most of my motivation. People come up to me and say, Matt, where do you get your ideas from? And I say, Rolling Stone magazine. Does anyone still read Rolling Stone? John, are you? Led Zeppelin has a new album out. So, thank you, and good night. So folks, in June 2013, somebody named Jeff Goodall, is he sitting here? Good, no. He wrote a piece, Goodbye Miami. This is not me speaking. By century's end, rising sea levels will turn the nation's urban fantasy land into an American Atlantis. But long before the city is completely underwater, chaos will begin. Folks, Paul Revere notified us that the British were coming. With Jeff Goodall providing us this piece of information, I'm fascinated by how we change our life as households, investors, and governments as we receive new pieces of information about emerging risks. So a first point, coastal cities, due to sea level rise, are likely to face greater risks and that we have built up significant capital stock in such locations. Let's see if I want to tell a story. So folks, can we all boo Miami underwater? So I received a phone call from the Economist magazine, and they said, Matt, we have some questions for you. I said, yes. They said, isn't it true that Wall Street is a key part of our economy? I said, yes. And they said, Matt, isn't Wall Street concentrated in southern Manhattan? I said, yes. And they said, Matt, isn't southern Manhattan at risk for sea level rise? And I said, yes. And the British reporter said to me, Matt, putting those three statements together, isn't the American economy screwed because Wall Street's going to flood because of climate change? And I said to the reporter, dear sir, you're an idiot. I said, Wall Street is a productive asset, not because it's on Wall Street. If Wall Street were to reconstitute on higher ground in Connecticut, we could have just the same productivity. If Goldman Sachs were to move to higher ground, all the smaller firms would follow it to the south. The reporter made the mistake that the greatness of the US, the greatness of our coastal cities is tied to place, and I don't believe that. Folks, the golden goose is between your ears. It's the brain. Welcome, goodbye. That's T-Boo sorting. And where the brain locates, you get what is a market. Where the brain chooses to locate, and where UCSB is an excellent university because of the co-agglomeration here. But there's nothing intrinsic about this beach that makes UCSB great unless it attracts great people to come here. And so a difference that I have with many scholars is that there are many places for our skill to co-agglomerate. And there's a question in our hotter future where this will take place. And there's about to be a competition between cities. Some questions, and back to known unknowns. The dangerous person doesn't know that he doesn't know what climate change will pose. I claim that most people in this room know that you don't know what climate change will pose. Folks, this creates an incentive to build in options in your life and flexibility. One of the reasons, how many undergraduates are here today to hear my nonsense? One of the reasons to major in a liberal arts education is general skills rather than doing glass blowing. Did anyone major in German glass blowing? If you go to some technical school where you're taught one craft, you know how to just do one thing. And if the future is not glass blowing, if Amazon figures out a drone that can do that, you've got a problem. But if you have a liberal arts education, learn to learn, as my father says, I'm on tape. That's for you, Dad. If you have a general liberal arts education, that is a type of option value technology. We don't know where the world is going. You have a flexible mind and you're ready to deal with the shocks and to roll with the punches. So folks, a first point I want to make is in some new work I'm doing, we need a less durable capital stock to help us to adapt to climate change. How many of you still play with Lego? Good. So folks, I want to say something, so let me be serious for a moment and go back. Part of the challenge that Miami could face if it floods, folks, do you see a nice multi-million-dollar building here? The owner of this building, if there's mass flooding, could lose this whole piece of real estate. But folks, what if our urban capital stock were modular so that this could be disassembled? What if we had options in areas which featuring sea level rise to disassemble such real estate? We would hold an option to move our capital stock to higher ground. And in this case, those cities that lose land to sea level rise would not lose the capital already on top of that. And so I want folks thinking a little more creatively about the potential so I'm cracking a half joke here that you guys don't think is funny. We have been building buildings that live for 80 or 90 years, and potentially we've been building them in the wrong places. If we are smart in the future, why don't we build buildings that are less durable? Why don't we build buildings that are modular, that we can take apart and drag to higher ground so that we don't lose those structures? If we anticipate we're going to face sea level rise in certain areas, why haven't we built in options to optimize as new information comes in? So folks, I already mentioned the future of Wall Street. So here is a picture of Wall Street with a big American flag. And in my presentation, this was my quote that I mentioned before from the Economist magazine, where they quoted me that even if southern Manhattan floods,
New York's productivity wouldn't fall at all. There'd be an adjustment equilibrium. A Keynesian would say there'd be stimulus. That was a joke. As we'd have to rebuild Wall Street's infrastructure on higher ground in Connecticut. And so if we anticipate that our coastal areas are at risk, there are incentives to build, especially if we're risk averse, on higher ground to have the same productivity benefits we've had. Why would we continue to live in a flood zone? More. Climate change not only is going to pose the challenge of sea level rise, it's going to pose a variety of challenges that will differ by city. There's going to be more temperature extremes. Have you noticed that Santa Barbara's been hot recently? Would you be willing to pay to not face that heat? I've just been sweating all the time. I'm usually much more attractive. We could have extreme rainfalls. There's sea level rise we've mentioned, natural disaster frequency and severity. Folks, at places like the Bren School at UCSB and at my UCLA Institute of the Environment, the climate scientists are doing a better and better job of modeling the challenges we face with spatial resolution. The climate scientists have every incentive, both as research nerds and as people who care about our future, to come up with better and better forecasts of the challenges we face. And I'd like to give you a very specific example. I have a colleague at UCLA named Alex Hall. And folks, does everyone see LA? Is anyone here from Los Angeles? Where from?
Santa Monica.
So you don't have a problem. So folks, here's how to read Santa Monica. What Alex Hall is doing is he's counting the number of days over 95 degrees Fahrenheit recently, and using climate models, he's predicting how many 95-degree days there will be 35 years from now when you guys are 40. Folks, if you subtract the red bar from the yellow bar, can you guys all do marginal analysis? So notice that Santa Monica is going to have no increase in 95-degree days. Look at Riverside. It's off the map. Riverside's going to have an extra 34 degrees of 95. It's going to have an extra 34 days. No, it's going to have 34.2 very hot days in the year 2050, which is an increment of over 20 relative to the base. Folks, my question's for you. From basic urban economics, 2 questions. What will happen to home prices in Riverside if they don't come up with strategies to adapt to this heat? They're going to plummet. This creates strong incentives for homeowners there. I'm an economist, a microeconomist. Who has an incentive to think about solutions for adaptation? Homeowners have all of their life savings in their house. If Riverside is going to become uninhabitable, the residents would have a sharp drop in home prices from the theory of compensating differentials. They have very strong incentives to come up with how to use trees, how to use shading, how to use ventilation of their homes, how to use air conditioning to keep their suburbs livable. Folks, is everyone with me? This is not a statement of let's reduce our carbon footprint. This is a self-interested statement back to Adam Smith. As a homeowner, if you're a Republican out in Riverside and it's 105 degrees each day in the year 2050, you have very strong incentives to invest in products and a lifestyle such that you can live your life. But folks, look at Santa Monica. If Santa Monica does not have this increase in heat, what's another adaptation strategy? If you visit Santa Monica, there are a series of single-family homes. In my work on climate change adaptation, we need to rezone the temperate parts of LA and build at Hong Kong density. Hong Kong's a perfectly nice city. You could put millions of people in the temperate zone so let's be Goldilocks, have them live far enough from the coast so they don't face sea level rise. I'm not an idiot, but close enough to the coast that it's nice and cool. Do you folks know that it's 30 degrees cooler in Santa Monica relative to Death Valley on a typical day? And so if you change zoning law, zoning is local, if you change zoning law and allowed multifamily housing in Santa Monica, millions of people could live in LA, in a reconstituted LA on higher ground. And so folks, in my Climatopolis book, I cracked the following joke that nobody understood. I said climate change is going to cause the people of LA to ride the subway. And since you're not laughing, let me explain the joke. It's late in the afternoon. New York City subway works because people live in apartment buildings and there's enough population density such that the very expensive subway's economies of scale are enjoyed. There's a huge fixed cost at $1 billion a mile to build a subway. You need You need millions of people using transit to ride it. If there's enough people living in high density, people will actually use LA's subway. And so this would be ironic if climate change caused people to use the subway, because we reconstitute our cities and our land use patterns to use the scarce resource, land in the temperate part of the city, intensively. So I'm asking for imagination. John Lennon had that song, Imagine. I'm reimagining what our cities will look like. How will we use our scarce resources more efficiently in the face of climate change? Of course, under business as usual, we've got big problems. But folks, did your cell phone exist 20 years ago? You try to log on to Google 20 years ago? Good luck. And so in this changing world, what will our entrepreneurs focus on? Where is there actually money to be made for anyone in the for-profit sector in this room? Folks, a quote about air conditioning. Singapore's founding father, who died last year, was asked what was the key to Singapore's fast economic growth over the last 50 years. And he said air conditioning was the most important invention for us, perhaps one of the signal inventions of history. It changed the nature of civilization by making development possible in the tropics. Without air conditioning, you can work only in the cool earning hours or at dusk. A difference between urbanites and farmers is we, including in this room during my lecture right now, we are insulated from the elements, and that cities have this comparative advantage, and that Singapore's greatness, so close to the equator, how many of you have been to Singapore? It's over 95 degrees every day, and that this city thrives. It shows you the potential for air conditioning. Of course there's costs of air conditioning. Folks, let me bring something closer to home. You can't see this so well. This is Santa Barbara after 7 meters of sea level rise. Do you see the 101 is a bit of a water road? So can anyone raise their hand if they've got a house right here? So there's a question of now 7 meters of sea level rise might be 100 years in the future, it might be 500 years in the future. I can't even conjecture. But folks, notice this is Paul Revere again. We can't say that we didn't get a warning of the challenges we face. So notice that there are parts of Santa Barbara on higher ground. I'm going to ask the same question. If these maps are true, and if over the next 150 years, in a horrible scenario where we keep increasing our greenhouse gas emissions, if we actually reach this sea level rise, does UC Santa Barbara continue as an excellent university? I say yes. You will rebuild larger structures on higher ground, substitute capital for land, unless local zoning precludes that. Only local government, through NIMBYism, can preempt our ability to adapt. Imagine a different future. Don't be a passive victim here. Of course, if you own a house, can someone name this street? I can't read it. This house may not sell for much in the year 2300. And we can think of that household is a victim of climate change. But there will continue to be large swaths of land with opportunities for entrepreneurs and future UCSB students. Folks, every city in California is issuing reports about the future. The San Diego Foundation released a report written by several UC San Diego faculty called a regional wake-up call. They make the following on average predictions. 4 degrees hotter on average, sea level rise. So notice this isn't 7 meters. Water demand up, wildfire risk, public health from air pollution and heat, much higher electricity consumption. Do I have any entrepreneurs in the room? Do I have anyone who hopes to be an entrepreneur? I got a few. Folks, a tip for the entrepreneurs in the room. Design a product that people want. Many environmentalists see crisis on this board, and of course there's crisis on this board. I see opportunity. I see billion-dollar markets. If you can come up with materials for homes that are resistant to wildfires, if you can come up with air conditioners that are more energy efficient, if you can come up with ways to increase our water supply as the snowpack melts, if you can come up with ways to protect housing from sea level rise, from stilts to others to floating homes, there are opportunities on this board. Crisis, the flip side of crisis, is opportunity. I cracked the joke that no one's going to find funny. If I were the only bald man in the world, would there be any Rogaine? In a world with billions of bald men, I'm looking at you, there is a market out there and billions of dollars for those companies that come up with a cure. Where there is demand, some entrepreneur will step up. And so the irony here is the more that we expect that there will be suffering from climate change, there will be endogenous innovation, and I will come back to that in 3 slides. Every city will forecast its future. Property owners in every city, I have all of my money in my Westwood house. Each of us has strong incentives to forecast our city's future. This information is public knowledge. So I'm a University of Chicago economist, and we've always argued from our school that information is cheap to pick up. And of course, I understand asymmetric information models. Of course, I understand there's costs of information, but the costs of being educated about the risks that different cities face in this internet, Twitter age in real time, it's getting we're asymptoting to the Chicago view of costless information. People will vote with their feet. If a city is expected to suffer because of climate change, the skilled will move away, home prices will fall, the mayor will be the mayor of a city with no tax base. In that sense, competition is good. Those cities that don't step up and try to improve their quality of life in the face of climate change will suffer a brain drain, and Detroit could be their future. California has had a wonderful quality of life, attracting companies like Facebook and all the other companies, and that's created the tax base to invest in the University of California. Those cities and locations that decline because they did not step up to address climate change challenges will have a property tax run, and even Republican mayors will note this. So unlike carbon mitigation, climate adaptation, even Republican mayors have strong incentives to adapt. Folks, you can't say you weren't warned. The city of Santa Barbara is doing detailed analyses of the challenges Santa Barbara faces. I encourage you to look this up. That was a public service announcement. So we already did this slide. Paul Revere revisited. For every challenge we can think of from the San Diego slide, this slide, for every single challenge, I want you to think about what quality of life challenges does it pose, but to the business people in the room, what new business opportunities does the challenge create? I mentioned this before. Human capital is the ultimate engine of modern economic growth. Those cities that can grow, attract, and retain the skilled have a bright future. Because Los Angeles has such great quality of life, does anyone view Los Angeles as a productive city? Its total real estate is worth $1.1 trillion. This is all amenity value. There's nothing productive about LA. It attracts skilled people because they want to live there. It has a kick-ass quality of life. But in no sense has my productivity been higher. My graduate students go surfing every day. At the University of Chicago, it was a commitment device. There was nothing to do. You work. And so if Los Angeles' quality of life suffered, this would vanish. 80% of this could go away. You can trade one Westwood house for 100 Detroit homes right now. And yet I don't see many people in Westwood making that trade-off. And that's the point of this slide. Los Angeles has a huge price premium, just like Santa Barbara for real estate, and that this price premium is due to amenities, not local productivity. In fact, with the internet, our productivity is usually independent. Many professors work at home and get more work done that day. Again, if climate change poses a quality of life threat, homeowners and the mayor, who has the local property tax revenue, have strong incentives to play defense to protect their city's quality of life, because they will be the mayor of a less important, less valuable asset if they don't adapt. Migration. If a city such as San Diego's quality of life suffers due to climate change, homeowners will be the residual claimant as people like the young people in this room will move away. Households always have the option to migrate away to another city. In this sense, migration breaks the link between urban places and urban people. Now, a critic should rightfully point out now that different groups, the elderly and less educated people, are less mobile. The young and the more educated are more mobile, and that provides insurance against shocks to any spatial area. And that's a very important point, and I think there needs to be more research on migration costs. If you love living in New Orleans area that is flood prone, you are exposing your family to great risk because you love that area. There are few adaptation strategies in that case. The willingness to migrate is a key piece of my adaptation optimism. Again, landowners, as the residual claimants on new news, have strong incentives to push their mayor and to take private actions to protect the value of their asset, and this helps us to adapt. Folks, as the case of China shows, but here's Las Vegas. Did you know in 1960 there was just 127,000 people in Vegas? And there's now more than 2 million people. Even the United States, putting China to the side, our cities can grow very quickly. And so there's a question of how, in an orderly way, we will evacuate some coastal areas, move from Wall Street to Connecticut, or move from towards Las Vegas to higher ground. Of course there's a time to build these new houses, but that creates economic opportunities for low-skilled workers. The construction sector has played a key role in many of our recent cycles. So there's actually opportunities created by building new capital on higher ground. I want to say something about UCSB research and to point to Olivier's work. It's very important for there to be new empirical work on our ability to adapt to climate change challenges. I've alluded to the case of Singapore, that Singapore in the heat has continued to have pretty great quality of life. Folks, in Singapore, the city comes to life at night when the sun sets, and it's about only 85 degrees. I want to tell you about Olivier's great paper with several co-authors. This is a fundamental paper that's coming out in one of the best journals of economics, the Journal of Political Economy. And I'm going to bring Olivier up here to explain it. I'm kidding. I'm going to incorrectly describe his picture. Folks, time goes from 1920 till the present. That's on the x-axis. On the vertical axis, to keep this simple, I want you to think about how many people, what percentage of people are dying in a state. Does everyone see the blue line that is coming down sharply over time? What the authors are graphing is, let there be a 90-degree day. So a 90-degree day is hot. Back in the 1920s, when nobody had air conditioning, what was the death rate on that day? And then to ask the same question, if we get punched in more recent times by a 90-degree day, we see that a lower death rate. Folks, does everyone see the sharp negative slope? We're getting better at taking a punch. We're not down at zero. Let's not be complacent. This line is not at zero. But does anyone believe this country is becoming a greater country? Is the world going to hell? Well, we can debate that in the questions and answers. Folks, this is a sign, an empirical sign of our ability to take a punch. We need to make these pictures in every country around the world. We need this picture in India, we need this picture in Egypt, and we need to learn. It could be the case that it's a horizontal line. Folks, by hypothesis testing, if we found a horizontal line, that would be evidence that we're not getting better at adapting and taking a punch. I want to know the truth. What's generating this picture is that we're growing richer and the price of air conditioning is declining over time. Folks, has the price of a quality cell phone declined over time? Has the price of computing fallen over time? The history of the US, quality adjusted, yes, of course. Go try to buy a 386 now. That was a joke. The history of the US is quality adjusted differentiated products getting cheaper and cheaper so that poorer and poorer people can afford these products. And so there's a lot of optimism in this picture, but let's not be complacent. For those looking for a research question, I think it's fascinating to ask, for poor people in Bangkok, for poor people in Cairo, what share of them have the income to have refrigeration, quality housing, air conditioning, so that they can take a punch, the punches we've listed before? The progress of the world economy is such that more and more urbanites around the world will have the income to insulate themselves. That's an optimistic claim. Again, Zuckerberg. I'm down to 8 slides. I want to be done in 5 minutes. How will firms react to anticipated climate change? Folks, one person's misery is one firm's opportunity. There is a huge literature in modern economics about directed technological change. Do you remember my baldness joke? There's a reason pharmaceutical companies don't work, unfortunately, on African vaccines. There's not enough money in it. The drug companies focus on challenges where there's a market. If there's enough anticipated suffering, if there's 7.3 billion people on the planet, each of whom might lose $5,000 from climate change, do the math. That's a huge market for the next generation of nerds. Zuckerberg focused on social networking. Why won't the next Zuckerberg, you can applaud for yourselves, focus on these issues with something potentially more valuable? What problems do our nerds focus on? And it's directed by signals, price signals. Think of Hayek. Folks, let me tell you about my colleague Tom Main of UCLA. So after Hurricane Katrina, thousands of people died in New Orleans. It was horrible. Tom Maine with Brad Pitt teamed up to make a floatable house, which they wanted to distribute in New Orleans. Does anyone want to live in this thing? You guys are bored? Just stop. I've walked out of lectures at many universities. Folks, this is an example of not being fatalistic about our future. Tom Maine was not trying to get rich off this project. After the horror of Katrina, he said, what can I as an architect do to make a difference? And he used Brad Pitt's fame to collect money from foundations to build this prototype. There's going to be learning by doing. And Maine is Dutch. There's going to be more of this. This is a type of optimism that a silver lining of disasters is learning that we face risks and what problems our entrepreneurs work on. And this is directed technological change. Folks, how do we protect the urban poor from everything we've unleashed? I don't believe, did anyone read Piketty's Capital? John, my goodness. Does he mention climate change? Thomas Piketty, the famous economist, has written a very important book that nobody's read on, you can turn off the videotape, on inequality. Climate change is going to further exacerbate inequality. The poor are likely to face the greatest challenges from climate change. For example, food prices could spike. The poor pay a larger share of their budget on food. Folks, if we don't have zoning laws, but because rents will be lower in flood zones, the poor will disproportionately live there if we don't zone them away. The poor don't have access to air conditioning or safe food or quality housing or refrigeration. There's a fascinating issue that we do, in a Rawlsian sense, have an imperative to protect the poor from these anticipated changes. And Milton Friedman's negative income tax. So how many of you have been taught Friedman's negative income tax? That every person has the right to a certain amount of income that is not a function, that doesn't have the perverse effects of discouraging work, a la AFDC and welfare. Friedman wanted to design an income system to give resources to the poor without distorting worker savings incentives. And we will have to revisit this because these are all very serious issues. And I know it and I know you know it. A richer society has more resources to be generous. Folks, more optimism before I wrap up. Have you noticed this is the age of big data? Can you all bring up your Uber app? In this age of big data, here are some jobs for all of you. We're going to see actuaries start to price risk parcel by parcel. We're going to need price differentiation such that in fire zones, insurance is more expensive. Folks, do you agree that if insurance is spatially priced such that in riskier places it's more expensive to get insurance, that this will move houses to safer places? Not rocket science, folks. Do any of you know GIS? All you know is some all you have to do is some GIS mapping and have up-to-date risk maps and then give that to the industry. The industry, if it's perfectly competitive, has strong incentives to get these probabilities right because they could go broke if they sell a cheap insurance policy in an area where the probabilities of disaster are rising. Folks, many people have said to me, Matt, you're a real Chicago economist and most people are a Homer Simpson who don't know what's going on. And I say, well, how do you know that? But then I say something more subtle. Suppose it's the case that there are Homer Simpsons who are unaware of this talk today. I don't see him in the audience. But keep in mind how insurance markets work. Homer Simpson from The Simpsons is a naive economic agent. He might be a climate denier. If Homer Simpson wants insurance, but if the insurance industry has used the leading climate science to be aware that an area faces risks, they will charge Homer a higher price for that insurance, and through substitution effects, that will induce Homer to move to a safer area even though he's unaware of the risks. A sufficient statistic is just what is the prices of insurance in different neighborhoods? And all else equal, he would move to the cheaper neighborhood. We've already mentioned this. Folks, we're going to see the rise of real-time water and electricity pricing. Have you noticed that California is in drought? In Los Angeles, we're paying a half-cent a gallon for water. You don't have to be von Neumann to say that one solution for getting us out of this drought is demand-side management and for water prices to rise. In intermediate micro, we talk about peak time pricing. With dynamic pricing, with your smartphone technology, you will have access in real time to your consumption of water, your consumption of electricity, and you can face time of day pricing, encouraging you to use resources off peak reducing the probability of a brownout of the grid. And folks, we use half our water outside. We use half of our urban water outside, and farmers use 80% of our water. If we had water markets, as Gary Leibkamp has studied, if we have water markets allowing farmers to sell their water, there'd be no issue at all. And so my colleagues at my UCLA Institute of the Environment who say California can't have any more human beings, we could have 80 million people in this state if we changed zoning rules and if we priced resources to reflect their scarcity. And so there's fascinating issues of economists stepping up and being proud of who we are and having some impact on public policy. I'm fascinated by, during a crisis, do silly policies, as their deadweight loss rises, are we more likely to get rid of silly policies like price ceilings on water? And I'm trying to work on that topic. Is a silver lining of climate change going to be that this will lead us to pricing scarce resources more appropriately, to send scarcity signals? In the past, because we didn't have cell phones, but before the age of big data, we just said, oh, people don't know what prices they face and we can't gouge them. But that can no longer be used as an excuse. Folks, a little bit about my own research. If you were to read one of my papers for folks in the room, a paper you might want to read is The Death Toll from Natural Disasters. As nations grow richer, the death count from natural disasters declines. This may be because of better housing, better emergency care, better food. And so there's an open, as China has grown richer, the death toll from natural disasters there has fallen dramatically. For those of you interested in development economics, as economic development takes place, because we're urbanizing, we have extra income to protect ourselves from the shocks Mother Nature is sending. Folks, that tsunami caused horrible damage in Indonesia, in Asia, a few years ago. In this Twitter age, we're going to have earlier alerts from natural disasters, and we're going to be better able to head to higher ground to reduce our death risk. If you combine this with a Lego economy allowing us to take capital to higher ground, we're even further insulated. 3 slides left. What is the role for national policy here? Something that interests me very much is, can government play too much coastal defense? Folks, how many of you have been taught moral hazard in your class? Again, what moral hazard is you're more likely to, I ask my UCLA students, when do you smoke in bed? And then they say something obscene. The answer I'm expecting to hear, I guess that's not funny. The answer I'm expecting to hear is when you have insurance, when you don't bear the costs. If you don't have insurance, you have stronger incentives to make smarter ex-ante decisions. If you anticipate you have a bailout, you take more risk ex-ante. I have argued that an unintended consequence of America's FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Act, the anticipation that coastal areas will have a bailout. Do you remember Chris Christie hugging President Obama after Hurricane Sandy? That was not love, that was poor politics. The anticipation, if Milton Friedman ran FEMA, we would be much better able to adapt to climate change. Because what FEMA does, in a simplistic way, is it subsidizes, it's a spatial subsidy to live in risky places. Safe areas tax dollars are being collected to subsidize living in risky areas, as they have an implicit guarantee that if a disaster occurs, that the coastal homeowners' homes will be rebuilt. In my model, a coastal area that wants seawalls would use its own local property tax revenue. It's not a national issue, it's a local issue. If you want a local public good of seawalls, use your own money, and that would create the right incentives to get a better spatial distribution of economic activity across the country. 2 slides left. People have said to me, Matt, you talk about cities, but don't people eat? So yeah. Folks, in a globalized economy, to help farmers adapt to climate change, remember from portfolio theory that we can diversify if shocks are not perfectly correlated. If climate shocks are negatively correlated or uncorrelated across space, Kansas could have a crappy harvest while Russia has a good harvest. So folks, if we have global trade in agricultural goods, we need nations all over the world to drop their tariffs and quotas on agriculture. If you have tariffs and quotas, I'm seeing young people sleeping, Professor has a photographic memory, I'm going to test you later. If you have tariffs and quotas, you have autarky, consumption equals production, and you're putting your people at risk for bad food shocks. But folks, In my book, Climatopolis, I made the following point. Did you know that dried fruit can live for 2 years? And so even if you were a closed economy, if during a bumper crop you took the fruit and you dried it, your people could have their vitamin C. So when the LA Times reviewed my book, they said, why is this lunatic talking about dried fruit? And I emailed this lady saying, young lady, this was a parable that even when we don't trade, we can self-insure, and that there's always strategies. If we anticipate that the amplitude of shocks is rising, that we can have boom, bust, boom, bust. If we anticipate this, we have strategies such as my parable of dried fruit for protecting ourselves. Very deep thinker that nobody understands. So folks, to help us to adapt to climate change, we face, and Kyle Meng is working on this topic right now in a very nice paper. So UCSB is one of the leaders on a series of topics here. Kyle has a paper on the spatial correlation of output across different agricultural goods. We need to learn much more because we can continue to eat well and be fat if when some areas are having a fallow harvest, if other areas are booming, this negative correlation. Folks, futures markets in agricultural goods that go further out in time will help us very much to adapt to climate change, as they will send signals of what is relatively scarce. Conclusion. I won't even sell my book. Last slide. And thank you for putting up with me. Folks, this has been a lecture on a late afternoon in an air-conditioned room on the microeconomics of climate change adaptation. Like a boxer, I want is the wrong word. The job of an economist is to explain and predict human behavior. My model of men and women is that you're adults, you're risk averse, and you know that you don't know. You anticipate and react. A fight that I want to have is, I'm a University of Chicago rational expectations economist, and I'm unapologetic. I'm the last Chicago economist. There is a crew, whether it's Thaler, Kahneman, there is a crew of behavioral economists. I claim that climate adaptation offers the ultimate test for distinguishing our hypotheses. One of my heroes, Lars Hansen, who shared the Nobel Prize with Fama and Schiller 2 years ago, is doing new work on robust decision rules. So he's not studying expected utility. He's modeling choice under uncertainty, but he's modeling men and women as pursuing robust decision rules. They know that they don't know what's the true set of shocks they're going to face in the future, but they're risk averse, and this leads you to take a worst case scenario planning. If this model is a correct model of how we make choices under uncertainty, it makes me more optimistic about our ability to adapt. In our future, we're going to need a flexible capital stock, the ability to migrate, the ability to move our capital stock, to be able to re-optimize as we learn. Final point. All over the world, there are 7.3 billion people. We're all going to be searching for solutions to adapt to climate change. Folks, ideas are public goods. We only needed Zuckerberg to create Facebook for us all to enjoy it. We didn't need the average person to do so. As 7.3 billion people seek new ways to create clean water, new ways to produce food under heat stress, new ways to build capital stock that can take floods, what's the probability that all 7.3 billion people come up with nothing? We need the best of those ideas. It's an order statistic, which I believe is very small. We will take the max. If there are only 3 people on the planet, we wouldn't be running many experiments. But in a world of 7.3 billion people, there's tremendous possibilities to experiment, and through the internet to spread these ideas, to learn. And this is how, unfortunately, we're going to adapt to this challenge that we have unleashed. John, thank you very much.
So we probably have some time for questions. Do we have any?
They want a break.
So you're saying, like, with the insurance and the price of water and electricity, let the prices rise and that'll incentivize people to move. Is there a worry, though, that lower income people will just be stuck, kind of stranded without any of those amenities?
So let me say something smart there. This is an excellent question. Folks, in the new paper I'm going to present at Portland in a keynote next month, let me say something smart there, because of course he's right. A point I forgot to make about Lego is the following. Folks, suppose you own that Lego building. A rental contract has a renter and the owner of the asset. Alex, if you own the building and it's in a flood zone, and you have the option, because it's Lego, to bring it to higher ground, would you leave it there? And so in a Lego economy, there wouldn't be any housing for the poor to live in. So imagine the following setup. There is an area where poor people are unaware that they're going to flood, but business people, the Don Trumps, are aware that sea level rise is coming. These Don Trumps will take their capital out of their own self-interest and drag it to higher ground, and there won't be any housing for the poor to live in. If you guys say, Matt, the poor will just lie on the ground, that's why I had this slide about zoning. If you worry that the poor will make choices that they will regret, if you're a benevolent paternalist, then you need to come up with zoning discouraging poor people from living in these areas. And that would be an act of benevolent paternalism that Cass Sunstein and others have spoken about. And there you're right. So do we believe in free will, or do we say these individuals are not aware of the full consequences of their actions? But so that was a long-winded way of saying, in a Lego economy, I'd be less concerned that the coastal areas will become poverty magnets because the owners of those assets will take them to higher ground, rather than have them destroyed.
So I've got a question. Did you hear this talk in Santa Monica?
So, yes, I have had, when I presented this in Santa Monica, widows started yelling at me the following. Here's what the widows said to me. This is going to be a point about the coast there. So, folks, I was in Santa Monica. So here's Malibu, here's Pacific Palisades, here's Santa Monica, Venice. A woman said to me, I like my community. Who are you, nerd, to blow up my community and turn it into Hong Kong? And I said, young lady, cool it. Here's what I have to say to you. I said, there are roughly 50 communities along the beach. I'm going to have the following mechanism for mechanism design. We had a Nobel Prize in mechanism design to Hurwitz, Maskin, and Meyerson just a couple of years ago. Let me give you a simple mechanism. John, I told her, and she didn't understand what I was saying, I said, I'm going to run an auction for beach communities, where I'm going to say, I'm going to give you X dollars. In return, you're going to get rid of your zoning laws and let me build at Hong Kong density. And whoever accepts the lowest bid, and then we'd run a ascending auction. I would start low and get higher and higher, and the first community who says yes gets the money and gets the zoning. And then she looked at me and said, okay, but it's not going to be us. And so I was not singling out Santa Monica. I knew you knew it as a beach community. We need to move millions of people. We need to give millions of people the chance for LA to stay productive, to be out of the heat but closer to the shore. We need to substitute capital for land. But I do believe in private property rights, but I think that local zoning is inefficient. Local zoning ignores the metropolitan area equilibrium. The coast theorem doesn't hold. The people outside of Santa Monica have no way. You people, the students at UC Santa Barbara who want to move to Santa Monica have no way to express that desire to the incumbent landowners who control zoning meetings in Santa Monica. And so I get bugged when the coast theorem doesn't hold. But I am a believer in private property, and the way to reconcile this is to have an auction along the coast. Yes? Yes?
Isn't there an issue that once Santa Monica becomes super urbanized, that temperature will rise there just because that's what happens in urban areas? It won't be like, in Allendale, it won't be that drastic, but it will be an externality.
I agree. So his point is that there's always an urban heat island effect, and he's right. What's going on at many schools of urban planning is how to build green roofs. And so again, what I'm going to say is, taking your very correct point as correct, there would be opportunities for building green roofs and other structures to try to minimize that effect. So there's attempts in LA to have green concrete that absorbs less heat. So your point is well taken, but we're never passive victims. If we can anticipate a challenge, when you anticipate you've got a very hard professor, you drop out. Or you study more. And so anticipate and react. If a punch is coming at your face, duck. And so again, what I very much like about your point, anticipate the new realities we're going to face, but don't be a fatalistic victim. What opportunities are created? Kyle.
So I have a very simple question that I don't know the answer to. Other than climate change, do we want to see more or fewer cities?
That is a great question. I'm going to answer, since I don't know the answer, I want to answer it differently. Alicina and Spilori have a book on the number of nations Folks, we need more migration across nations. With the recent crisis in Syria, I have blogged that I support opening up America's border. So I didn't talk about this, but I am comfortable with America having 4 billion people in it. I talk about migration across U.S. cities as an adaptation strategy, but international migration is another strategy. Alcina and Spilori have done great work on the benefits and costs of nation size. Here's the trade-off. If a nation is the smaller is a nation, you can have very tailored public goods to the bliss point you want, but you might not achieve the efficiency of low average fixed cost. And so their work was about this trade-off in a heterogeneous world of you want more people to get average fixed costs down, but if you have more people, they may not have the same preferences, and you may have a median voter problem. Coming to Kyle's question, I think we need a larger menu of cities. So I'm very interested in China and India. Do these nations have enough cities to form a menu? Kyle, let me say something smarter. Is anyone here from South America? South America has an issue that nations like Chile and Argentina, more than half the population lives in the capital city. Glazer and Adis wrote a great QJE paper on urban primacy. In South America, where nations have few cities, that's going to be a problem in adapting to climate change. Because remember, a key part of my story was perfect competition among mayors. If some mayor has a monopoly, for example, Beijing's mayor basically has a monopoly. Because of Beijing's unique political powers, many skilled Chinese people don't want to leave Beijing, even though it's very polluted. Folks, that's very bad incentives for a mayor. If a mayor knows that he or she has market power, there are weaker incentives to step up and address these issues. So I want enough cities for there to be competition, but I want these cities to have the right scale for providing public goods efficiently.
So in a state like California, where we have these areas like in central California where you've got, it's a classic area of extreme climate, and then you're, in contrast to the coasts, where the climate extreme is much less. What do you foresee as being
sell real estate?
The dynamics of population growth then? So do you see a flight from the extreme population areas, or do you see that there's going to be more of carbon use,
So Rick Hornbeck of Harvard had a paper in the American Economic Review called The Dust Bowl, where he asked what happened to the people of the Dust Bowl as the Dust Bowl events in the 1930s, I'm going to get my decades wrong, occurred. And there was a vast out-migration from the region. The region was permanently poorer and less populated. And so what I think you're alluding to, and this comes back to Alex's question, is remember I made the distinction between urban places and people. I certainly agree with you that there could become places that become uninhabitable. And those places, real estate prices will fall. It'll be very interesting if they become poverty magnets. And if they do become poverty magnets, we're back to that benevolent paternalism question. Are you comfortable with people living there, or would you destroy the housing there and fence it off such that people can't live there? So if there's areas in California which are 120 degrees, and if people want to live there, we will wrestle with the question of whether we let people live there, and is air conditioning powerful enough to offset that? Or will we have stringent land use zoning covered in solar panels so that it can't be used for housing? And that will be a decision in the future. And a real estate point to end on, the owners of that asset would suffer a capital loss if it becomes an uninhabitable area, and thus would have strong incentives, like my Riverside example before here, of trying to come up with strategies to keep it livable. But I agree with you, it's a very real challenge. Thank you very much.
So we have refreshments back, and so Matt will stay around.
For the rest of your life.
And,
thank you very much, folks.
Thank you.